Nightfall in El Paso didn't feel like anywhere else. The air carried a metallic scent, cold and sharp like the edge of a blade, mingled with desert dust, and the muted groans from alleys so narrow they didn't show up on any tactical map. At the far western edge of the city, an abandoned warehouse slouched in silence. Corrugated steel panels sagged overhead, full of holes that spoke of bullets long forgotten. In the distance, a drone blinked faintly, its red light pulsing like the dying heartbeat of something once alive. Somewhere in the dark, a voice crackled over the radio. Low, firm, unflinching. No call for confirmation. No room for mistakes. Kyla Monroe crouched low behind a brick wall, her hand wrapped tightly around a semi-automatic. Next to her, Rook, her jet-black German shepherd, didn't make a sound. Not a growl, not a breath out of place. His eyes locked on the steel door ahead. 3 hostages were inside. And the man behind that door had just warned that in 10 minutes, without ransom, one of them would die. Kayla raised 2 fingers, signaling a silent command. It was a language only she and Rook knew, a language that couldn't be copied, broken, or decoded. There was no backup plan, only one direction to move. Forward. A gust of wind slipped through a crack in the wall, sending a strip of plastic curtain fluttering in the yellow light spilling from a flickering street lamp. Rook didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion he leapt through the gap, silent as a ghost, and vanished through a side door. Kayla counted the rhythm of his footsteps. 3, 2, 1. The first gunshot came from inside, but not from their team. It was the hostage-taker, finger tightening around the trigger aimed at a terrified 9-year-old. But just before that trigger could finish its journey, Rook exploded out of the dark and slammed into his chest, driving him to the ground with brutal precision. In the same instant, Kayla kicked in the door. The lock snapped. She moved like a flash of light. Takedown 1, elbow strike, pivot, second down. Close quarters combat at its purest. No screaming, no begging. Just 17 seconds of cold, flawless violence. When the overhead lights came on, all 3 hostages were safe. 2 criminals lay unconscious. The third was pinned beneath Rook, his eyes wide with something worse than pain. Fear, pure and primitive. Kayla dropped to one knee beside the child. Her hand gently brushed the girl's collar. Her voice, soft as dusk, whispered, "You're safe now. Rook's here." Outside, sirens howled into the dark. A reporter, no one knew from where, snapped a photo just as Rook turned his head, chest heaving, paw pressed on the kidnapper's shoulder like a vow carved in stone. No one dies tonight. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. The silent soldier. That's what they called Kayla. And Rook, the decorated K-9 with more missions behind him than most soldiers, was hailed as a legend reborn. But beneath the glory, Kayla felt something shift. Not out there, inside her. On the ride back, Kayla watched Rook through the armored glass. He wasn't lying down like usual. He sat upright, watching the road. Not the road behind, but ahead. As if he knew something was coming. For the first time in years, Kayla didn't sleep on the way back to base. Her hands felt colder than normal, and her palms still trembled. Rook stayed quiet, but Kayla understood. This wasn't just another mission. It might be the last time they stood together in the light. At 3 a.m., the armored truck rolled through the base gate. The sky above El Paso hung heavy with gray, but the rain never came. Lamplight stretched across the damp pavement, reflecting the distorted shadows of 2 survivors, 1 woman, 1 dog. Kyla stepped out first. Rook followed, no leash needed. His ears drooped slightly, but his eyes scanned every wall, every door. He wasn't walking like a soldier off duty. He was still watching, still listening. They passed through the training yard. Steel frames glistened with dew, old boots and dusty chairs scattered like ghosts of rookies passed. Rook walked slower than usual, head high, and for a second, Kayla thought he was listening to something only he could hear. Inside the main building, Kayla's eyes caught a photo on the hallway wall. Federal Tactical Unit, 2021. She stood in the middle, hand resting on Rook's back. They were both smiling. Really smiling. How long had it been since she'd seen that face in the mirror? A plain envelope waited on her desk. No stamp, no sender. Just one line. Requested to report. She opened it. Her eyes stopped on the final words. Internal meeting. Tomorrow night. Classification. Top secret. Nothing on the page screamed danger. But the moment she touched it, a coldness slid down her spine. Like someone had been there before her. Like this wasn't the first time her desk had been touched. That night, she didn't change out of her uniform. Didn't unclip her belt. Kayla sat still in the glow of her night lamp. Her face, lined with smoke and sun, caught in soft amber light. Rook lay at the foot of the bed, chin on his paws. But his eyes didn't close. His pupils widened in the dark, not toward the door, but toward the space behind the thin curtain. At 3:30, Kayla drifted off for 10 minutes. When she woke, Rook hadn't moved. But this time, his neck turned. His ears stood up. And then for the first time since 100 missions ago, Rook barked. Just once. Low. Quiet. But it cut through the silence like a blade through silk. Kayla sat bolt upright. She didn't hear anything. She didn't ask, because if Rook had spoken. Something was already in motion. The sun rose slowly that day. Not gold, not warm, but a pale silver, like tarnished steel drawn across the sky. When Kayla stepped into the mess hall, she felt it. The shift, not admiration after a mission, not envy, but something else. Quiet, sharp, watching. Like she wasn't a soldier anymore, but a subject, under surveillance. A young sergeant saluted, but didn't meet her gaze. A technician, one who used to sneak treats to Rook, turned away without a word. And halfway through the corridor, Rook stopped. Not because of a sound, not because of a threat, but something in the air, something Kayla couldn't sense, yet Rook could. The fur along his spine lifted, his stance tightened. Kayla had to call his name twice before he moved again. That's when she knew. That old instinct, the one buried deep in the bones of every seasoned fighter, rose to the surface. When a loyal dog changes his rhythm, the world around him already has. And on certain days, like that one, silence becomes the loudest kind of warning. By afternoon, the sky wore a pale yellow sheen. Sunlight pushed faintly through frosted glass, tinting the admin hall in faded dust. The walls felt close, listening. A call came in, no details, no voice raised. Just a flat message. Major Monroe, report to room 7C. Urgent. The officer on the line spoke evenly, but at the very end there was a breath, a pause, almost like he wanted to say more, and couldn't. Kayla reached for her coat. Rook stood before she even called. No leash, no hesitation. Just instinct. 11 years. Always at her side. Hallway 4 led to the restricted intelligence wing. Soundproof glass. Surveillance cameras that never blinked. The door to room 7C stood slightly ajar. Unusual. Inside, no commanding officers, no insignias, no welcome. Just one man. Tall, lean, pale-faced in a wrinkled black suit. His eyes were sunken, like he hadn't slept in nights. He didn't extend a hand, didn't offer a title. just said, "I'm a liaison from Homeland Security." Kayla didn't answer. She didn't have to. Behind her, Rook stiffened. His breath deepened. His muscles braced. Quiet. Coiled. Alert. The man flipped a folder open. I pulled 2 photos. Low res, surveillance quality, washed in green static. One image showed Kayla in conversation with a man on a southern street corner. His face shadowed. A vehicle's brake light glared behind him, but just enough light caught a tattoo on his arm. The man's voice came again, this time harder. "When did you speak to him?" It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Kayla remembered. 6 months ago, she'd visited a former K-9 handler, a double amputee, Operation X Ridge. That man wasn't the focus, just his nephew, the one who answered the door. But in blurry photos, truth weighs less than narrative. Before she could explain, the man cut in. Sharper now. "We believe you may have knowingly or unknowingly leaked internal troop movements to a domestic extremist cell. You are hereby suspended from active duty, effective immediately." No time for shock, no space for protest. 2 plainclothes officers entered the room, one wearing gloves, the other holding a recording device. Rook growled, low, controlled, but unmistakable. Kayla raised her hand. One motion, that was enough to calm him. But Rook's eyes never left the man in the suit. Then came the blow that cut deeper than all the rest. "The dog will be reassigned to North Lake for temporary evaluation." Kayla turned. Slowly. That phrase, reassigned for evaluation, wasn't a procedure. It was a blade slicing the thread that bound them together. Years of war, years of trust, years of Rook stepping into fire, standing between her and death. Now swept aside by one cold phrase. Temporary reassignment. No one asked Rook. No one asked if a 4-legged warrior wanted to leave his partner. As they escorted her out, Kayla turned her head. Just once. And she saw Rook resisting the leash. He barked. Short. Sharp. Loud. A bark that ricocheted off the sterile corridor walls, not asking for help, not begging, just saying what had to be said. "I'm still here." Then the doors closed. And that was the last time Rook saw her. No farewell, no folded flag, no taps. Just a gray afternoon where a soldier was stripped of honor, and a dog was led away like he'd never had a name. Rook's footsteps grew heavier with every hallway, as if every step was a goodbye. And when the gate clanged shut behind him, that was the end of a chapter neither of them wanted to write. Inside those soundproofed walls, under a ceiling of harsh white lights, Kayla sat alone. Room 47B, they called it, a name that felt more like a label on a storage crate than a place meant for people. There were no cuffs on the table, but they weren't needed. The moment the door shut behind her, she knew everything familiar was already gone. The empty chair across from her stayed that way for 12 minutes. And in those 12 minutes, Kayla could hear every beat of her heart. Not because she was afraid, but because whatever was coming wasn't an accusation. It was a decision. When the door opened, 4 people walked in. 1 officer from JAG, 1 from internal security, 1 from strategic media, and the last, someone she used to believe had her back, Deputy Commander Mason Griggs. No one greeted her. No one extended a hand. Everything unfolded like a play they'd rehearsed too many times. So well, in fact, that they'd stripped out all the human parts. The media rep turned on a tablet. A screen behind them lit up. A video began playing, grainy footage like it was pulled from an old surveillance camera. There was Kayla standing beside a military truck in the technical depot, Her voice, distorted but audible. Coordinates. Western side. Movement. Concealment. The footage jumped. A different angle now, this time from a hallway. Kyla, holding a phone, her face tense, arguing with someone. One word kept repeating in the audio. Data transfer. She didn't move. The internal agent leaned forward, his voice low, stripped of emotion. We've received reports indicating you exchanged sensitive troop movement data related to New Laredo. That aligns with the timeline of a supply convoy ambush. No one asked if she wanted to speak. No one confirmed her identity. And even when Kyla began to open her mouth, Mason spoke over her. Cold. Measured. I filed the report. The room fell silent, like someone had dropped a blade onto concrete. Kayla turned to look at him. Mason Griggs. The man who once nodded to her in sandstorms and night raids. The man who used to whisper, "You lead this one, I'll cover," because someone else had kids waiting at home. He wouldn't meet her eyes. His stare hovered somewhere above the table, like someone had told him, "Don't look at Kayla Monroe. Don't remember. Don't remember the times Rook took the hit. Don't remember when Kayla volunteered for missions no one else wanted." He went on, "You accessed an unregistered data drive. Security cameras show you exiting the tech room at 2:17 hours. The log said equipment check, but everything was already sealed that night." His voice wasn't cruel. It was clinical, like a judge stamping a sentence he didn't write. Kyla pressed her lips together. No tears. No outburst. Just the stillness of someone watching a betrayal dress itself up as protocol. 10 minutes later, the meeting was over. No verdict, no transcript. But she understood. The danger wasn't in the footage. It was in the way no one in the room wanted to believe anything else. As she stepped into the corridor, the scent hit her. Old tile. Fresh paint. Pressed uniforms. But for the first time in 12 years, Kayla felt like this place no longer recognized her. People looked away as she passed. Not out of shame, not out of guilt, just avoidance. No one asked about Rook. No one asked if she was okay. Just the whistle of wind slipping through the hallway vents, echoing like time falling out of her hands. And at the far end, a round mirror on the wall caught her reflection. A soldier. Once trusted. Now walking toward a place with no name. A closed meeting. A blurry video. An old ally turned accuser. And a door that no longer led back. That night the lights went out earlier than usual across the base. The hallway dimmed, like someone wanted the truth to disappear before anyone had the chance to remember it. Kyla packed what little she could. A toothbrush, a folded shirt, a photo, face down. Then a knock. Not 3 short taps like protocol. Just one. Then the door opened. 2 men entered, one in uniform, name tag removed, the other in a black dress shirt, no insignia. No greetings, no explanations. They handed her a document, detention order. No charges, no signature from a superior, just one line in bold. Federal investigation, classified level. Kyla stared at the paper like it was a tired joke. But the man in black wasn't laughing. His face wasn't mocking, it was empty, like this had been done before. Too many times. Then a sound. Heavy. Familiar. Like wind slamming into brick. The door behind her creaked open. Rook stepped inside. No one had called him. No one had opened the latch, but somehow Rook knew. He stopped in the center of the room. Ears up. Eyes locked on the 2 men. Then a voice from a radio clipped to the soldier's belt. "The dog needs to be separated." Kayla turned. Separated? Her voice cracked. "Rook's a soldier. A Kalinstic, a—" "Not anymore," the man cut in. "According to the new order, Rook is being transferred to Northlake for behavioral review." "You're speaking like he's under suspicion." "That's not our call," the man said flatly. "The order came from above." Kayla dropped to her knees. She reached for Rook's head, her hand trembling slightly, but steady. Rook stepped in, rested his head against her chest, then looked up. No sound. But in those eyes, Kayla could see it. Rook was memorizing her face, every line, every shadow, the face of the woman who had stood beside him through it all. She didn't plead, didn't cry. But when the men moved to take Rook, something in her broke free. It wasn't logic, it was instinct. "Don't take Rook from me." No one answered. The door opened. Rook turned once, locking eyes with her. And then Kayla screamed, not in fear, but because she knew. When a dog is taken without a reassignment form, it means they're not coming back. "Rook!" Her voice tore through the empty corridor like shrapnel, but Rook was already pulled beyond the cold white wall. Plastic zip ties coiled tight around her wrists, no clicking sound, no metal. She was escorted out of the building, across dew-soaked grass. Ahead, a waiting vehicle, no license plates, no visible driver. They pushed her into the back seat. The door slammed shut behind her, a sound that felt like goodbye. From the base to Hemlock Federal Detention, no one said a word. Kayla stared through the narrow gap in the window, watching the city sleep. Buildings lit, cars rolling, life moving on like a silent film, with the soundtrack cut out. Inside her mind, there was only one image left. Rook's eyes, locked on hers, right before he vanished behind the steel door. It wasn't a goodbye, and it wasn't a plea. It was the gaze of a warrior saying, "I won't forget." And when the transport stopped in front of Hemlock's main gate, Kayla understood. The greatest fear wasn't imprisonment. It was being erased. In a world where truth only mattered if someone felt like remembering it. The gate creaked open. No greeting, no explanation, no paperwork. Just the slow, dragging sound of metal mesh sliding over rails. And Kayla walked in. Not as a convicted criminal, but as a memory someone wanted to be buried. Hemlock was where names once praised got scrubbed clean, where achievements disappeared from the record, a place no one asked about, a place that didn't exist on maps. Because in Hemlock, the government owed no one an explanation, and pain needed no justification. They placed her in cell 14. A concrete box, no windows, no clock, no calendar, just one bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a white light so harsh it felt like frost. Her rank was stripped. Her uniform was replaced with an inmate suit, 711K. No one used her name anymore, only numbers. And for the first 3 days, Kayla said nothing. No answers, no protests, because she already knew from the moment they took Rook, this wasn't about justice. It never had been. At night, Hemlock went dead silent. No voices, just the steady drip from a rusted air pipe above. A rhythm, slow, relentless, like an invisible clock counting down the life of someone forgotten. Kayla didn't sleep. She lay on a thin pad over cold iron slats, eyes fixed on the ceiling blank, shapeless. And in those still moments, she whispered in a voice barely her own, "Rook, don't forget me." 3 words, soft as breath, but each time she said them, her chest clenched, as if her memories were fighting off the rot that tried to take root in her mind. By the 10th day, Kyla began counting the guards' footsteps. Shifts rotated every 4 hours. Some walked heavy, some floated like mist. She didn't memorize them out of curiosity. She did it because without time, the line between day and night blurred. No letters, no visitors, no messages. She once imagined she'd be furious, that she'd scream, revolt. But anger never came. Just an emptiness. Cold, deep, terrifyingly quiet. Kayla began rewriting the story inside her head. Through memory, through sensation. Through the soft breaths Rook made during nighttime camps. Through the sound of his paws echoing down empty halls. Through that glance when Rook knew someone was behind them before anyone else did. No one asked about those moments, but she remembered. Rook had never left her behind on a mission. Not once. And he wouldn't this time either. She believed if truth had a form, it would come on 4 legs, with eyes that didn't lie, moving through walls and wire just to reach her again. And because of that belief, Kayla lived. Not to win, not to escape, but to wait for her name to be spoken again, not by a judge, but by the sound of familiar footsteps tapping against a frozen floor. Somewhere far north, where rows of pine trees stood guard along the gravel road into the North Lake Training Center, Rook sat quietly in the corner of Kennel 19. Eyes open, but not blinking. Tail still. Ears up, but not reacting. A living statue caught in the last light of day. Present, but not belonging. They noted in the report, transferred from a federal unit. No retraining needed. Non-responsive to basic commands. Displays behavioral instability. And beneath that, in red ink, possible trauma linked to handler separation. Reassessment required. But no one at Northlake really cared why Rook had changed. This place wasn't built for questions. It was built to sort. The strong were filtered into new task forces. The slow, the too aggressive, or the uncooperative were labeled, categorized, shifted into the removed from cycle group, and quietly erased from the system. No one asked where they went. Rook didn't attack. But he didn't let anyone near. Whenever someone stepped up to the kennel gate, Rook simply watched. No growl, no bark. But that stare, it made even seasoned handlers step back. There was something in his eyes. Not fear, not hope. Just a hollow space where a warrior had once stood, like Rook had seen the end of what a K9 could endure, and returned with only survival in his bones. One new staffer once tried to approach with a squeaky toy. She knelt, held it out, voice bright and gentle like a training manual. "Come on, buddy, wanna play?" Rook didn't move. Only after she stepped back 2 paces did he finally turn his head slowly, like forgiveness being offered, but not given. They started calling him something at the center. The silent ghost. He didn't eat with the others, didn't go out on schedule, didn't obey a single directive. But he never lashed out either. Rook just waited. Each night, after drills ended and the center fell into silence, a few night shift workers would see him rise, step softly to the front of the kennel, and stare into the distance. Toward nothing. Just fencing. Dark forest. And a sky scattered with pale, flickering stars. One night, when the wind howled harder than usual, Rook let out a long, low howl. It wasn't wild. It wasn't mournful. It sounded like a breath that had been buried too long finally breaking free. The whole kennel row fell still. Dogs that had been gnawing on bars or curled in sleep stopped, lifting their heads. But none howled back. Just one voice. Alone. Fading into the cold. The next morning's log added a line. Recommend no pairing with other dogs at this time. Possible signs of dissociative disconnect. But no one knew, or maybe no one wanted to know, that Rook wasn't looking for connection with his kind. What Rook waited for wasn't in the orders, wasn't on any list, wasn't even considered real anymore. Rook was waiting for a breath he knew, a hand on his head, a voice in the dark whispering, "Good boy, Rook." Each day in North Lake etched a little more light from Rook's eyes, but deep beneath the stillness, some ember still glowed, like a coal buried under ash. No one dared get close, no one gave commands, no one asked any more. Only Rook, in the shadows of Kennel 19, kept facing that direction toward a place with no name. A place where maybe, just maybe, a call was still waiting. And then, one windy morning, Old Man Murphy showed up. He wasn't on the payroll anymore. Murphy used to be the lead trainer at North Lake, a legend among K9 handlers, 30 years in the service, hundreds of dogs trained. He'd had a mild stroke, retired quietly, moved to a wooden cabin 10 miles out by the edge of the forest. But sometimes, for the tough ones, the ones no one else could reach, Murphy came back. And Rook was the toughest case yet. When the staff read him the reports, Murphy just lit a cigarette, settled onto the wooden bench across from the kennels, and stared at Rook for 15 straight minutes. Nobody spoke. They waited for the verdict. Murphy said nothing. Just sat there. His eyes, lined with age, calm as frozen lake water, mirrored exactly what he saw in Rook's. At last he exhaled softly, almost too soft to hear. "This one's not broken." No one argued, but a younger trainer offered hesitantly, "He's unresponsive, sir. Won't obey. No contact." Murphy turned to him. Not harsh, but firm. "He's not unresponsive. He's waiting." That afternoon, Murphy filed a request to take Rook home. Not under any standard adoption policy, but under a rarely used classification, individual recovery sponsorship. A special provision meant for battle-worn K9s who couldn't be fully decommissioned. Most of those forms ended up forgotten. Half-finished, discarded, but not this one. On day 17, Rook left North Lake. It was drizzling. No one lined up, no one recorded the handoff. But as the last gate opened, Rook stopped. Turned once. I looked back at Kennel 19. Just a glance. Barely a second. But Murphy saw it. He smiled, barely. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know you remember." Murphy's cabin sat quietly beneath the shadow of old pine trees, with a long porch that looked out over a still lake. He didn't chain Rook, didn't cage him, didn't give commands. Every morning Murphy just opened the door, poured a black coffee, and settled into his worn rocking chair, like a man waiting for winter to pass. For the first 3 days, Rook didn't eat. He only drank water, sat by the porch, ears alert, eyes searching beyond the trees, as if trying to track something he'd lost along the way. Murphy didn't force it. He simply left the food near the steps, unlatched the kennel door, and swept the porch in silence. On the 4th day, Rook ate half. On the 5th, he walked to the lake on his own and sat beside Murphy's chair, and on the 6th, Rook lay down for the first time, resting his head on Murphy's old combat boots. The same pair, beaten and patched, with the heel stitched by hand. Murphy didn't pet him, didn't say a word. He just pulled a light blanket over Rook's back as the wind turned colder. That night, for the first time in nearly a month, Rook slept. The next morning, Murphy tried a soft command. Rook lifted his head, but didn't move. Murphy chuckled. "That's all right. I don't like taking orders anymore either." And so they fell into a rhythm without a name. No commands, no drills, no leash. But each morning, like clockwork, when Murphy's cough echoed through the cabin and the door creaked open, Rook was already there, waiting, not barking, not rushing in, just sitting. Silent, grounded, steady like the fading shadow of a soul who once learned that waiting is part of survival. No one trained Rook anymore. But Rook hadn't forgotten how to move beside someone, how to follow the pace of boots he trusted. And some nights, when the radio clicked on and the evening news played, if a voice even vaguely resembled Kyla's, Rook would tilt his head slightly. Not move. Just breathe. A little slower. Murphy didn't speak, just reached down, gently brushed a finger across Rook's ear. His eyes didn't lift to the screen. They stayed on the floor, right where Rook lay. Your time'll come. She'll find you again. And Rook, as if he understood, closed his eyes. Not because he was content, but because somewhere out there, someone still believed that waiting was never in vain. A week later, a letter arrived from Northlake. An invitation. They were holding a live field demonstration, a public showcase for visiting dignitaries, where elite units would display obedience drills, tactical maneuvers, and all the shiny results of their training programs. Murphy hated those shows. He hated the lights, the fake whistles, the heavy scent of cologne clinging to crisp suits. But this time, he said yes. Maybe he was tired of watching Rook wander the edge of the wooden yard, staring into the trees waiting for something no one could name. That morning, Murphy didn't wear a uniform. He put on a faded gray shirt, his old khakis, and those same field boots, still stitched at the heel. Rook walked beside him. No leash, no command, no name call. Just side-by-side steps, two old warriors breathing the same rhythm. By the time they arrived, the grounds were set. Fencing, tents for guests, cameras rolling. Murphy didn't put Rook in line. He stood behind the trucks, out of view. Rook sat at his feet. Calm, unbothered by the barking orders, the stomping boots, the PA announcements. But then, a black SUV pulled into the center of the field. The door opened. Senator Vaughn stepped out. Tall, broad shoulders, that polished strut of a man who knew every spotlight would find him eventually. His eyes were cold, arrogant, as if he wasn't just arriving to an exercise, but stepping onto a stage meant for him alone. Murphy didn't look up. He unscrewed the lid of his thermos, poured a bit of coffee. Only Rook raised his head. And in that quiet second, when no one else noticed, Rook stood, front paws firm, neck extended, eyes locked onto the man exiting the SUV. No growl, no bark, no leap, just a gaze, steady, sharp, unblinking, like something ancient and buried had just split open in his memory. Murphy felt it, the cold climb up his spine. He leaned down, placed a hand on Rook's shoulder. Rook didn't move, didn't blink, still watching. And Murphy, a man who had watched dogs rush through gunfire, who had held the torn bodies of heroes wrapped in fur, understood one thing in that moment. Rook wasn't remembering. He was recognizing, not a smell, not a sound, but a truth rooted so deep in instinct that no human could name it, and no dog could ever forget. Vaughn kept walking. He never saw Rook, never noticed that just behind him a pair of eyes followed, not with hate, but with a question that had never been answered. That night, Murphy said nothing. He just sat on the porch, coffee trembling in his hands, a thin crack trailing the rim of his favorite mug. Rook rested his head on Murphy's leg, eyes open. Murphy didn't ask. He didn't need to, because in that look, that stare that didn't waver, something had been awakened, not instinct, evidence. And if the world had any sense left, if it still knew how to listen, then maybe, just maybe a dog had just started telling the one story no one else could. That morning, the Texas sky wore a quiet shade of gray, like the fog had crept in overnight, not to soften the day, but to veil something that was drawing near. At the North Lake K-9 training facility, they were holding their annual ceremony. A solemn tribute to the four-legged soldiers who had fallen in the line of duty. A long banner lined the entrance, printed with the insignias of K-9 units from across the country. Wooden stands held black and white portraits, each marked with a name, a date of sacrifice, and a simple inscription. Service, loyalty, never forgotten. Guests arrived early. National news networks had set up signal towers. Military correspondents clipped mics to their collars. Rows of white-covered chairs awaited in the center court, each seat marked with a single rose reserved for the families of fallen K-9 heroes. And right on schedule, at 10 a.m., sharp and armored SUV rolled through the gates, flanked by 2 escort vehicles. The air grew colder as the car door opened. Senator Vaughn stepped out, just as expected. Black suit, gray tie, shoes polished to mirror finish. His stride was too steady, too deliberate, like he believed he was the embodiment of honor itself. Applause followed him. Cameras tracked his every step. And then Vaughn took the microphone, bowing his head briefly before speaking. "We gather here today," he began, "to remember the silent warriors, those four-legged souls who served without glory, fought without praise, and fell without ceremony. The K-9 unit is an irreplaceable symbol of loyalty." His words rang clear. His face wore the solemn dignity of grief. Anyone watching the broadcast would believe him. Everyone seated below likely did, because his words were perfect. His voice didn't shake. His gaze never flinched. But far away, behind the ceremony grounds, past 3 long rows of kennels tucked in the shadows, a creature watched. Rook. No muzzle, no chain, but no freedom either. Rook sat motionless inside the run, a dark silhouette stretched long across cracked concrete. The slanting winter sun cast a thin line of light through the bars, falling right across Rook's forehead like an invisible cross. Murphy stood at the far end of the corridor. Arms folded, eyes locked on Rook. Rook didn't bark, didn't growl, but his gaze never left Vaughn. Even with dozens of meters and a sea of people in between, Rook stared as if nothing else existed. And had someone stepped into the shadows of the back walkways, they might have seen Rook wasn't looking like a dog recognizing an old master. He was watching like a soldier who's just spotted the man who dragged away the one person he was sworn to protect. The speech continued. The same poetic words, the same practiced tone. A voice like a flag salute carved in stone. But in Rook's eyes, the entire world had shrunk to a single shape. One pair of footsteps, one scent from long ago, leather polish, cheap hairspray mixed with fading mint, the scent Kayla always noticed when Vaughn passed the command corridor. Murphy knew. Rook hadn't forgotten. Not out of hatred, but because dogs don't edit memory. They don't revise. They don't lie. A bell rang across the ceremony field, signaling the moment of silence. The whole base froze, flags lowered to half-mast, hands pressed to hearts, cameras dipped their heads. And in that breathless pause when every gaze turned downward, when the noise of the world vanished, Rook stood. No sound, no rattle of chains, just one simple motion. He stood, placed both front paws gently against the kennel gate, head tilted slightly, eyes locked on the figure speaking beneath the flags. Murphy's fists tightened. No one else knew what was about to happen. But he did. Because what was coming wasn't part of the ceremony anymore. It was truth, trying to speak for itself. And then, it came. No warning. No signal. A thunderclap tore through the silence of the ceremony like someone had slashed the sky with a blade of sound. Gunshots. Not one, 3, spaced, clear, deliberate. The sound of shattering glass, screams from the guests, the scuffle of feet, chairs crashing over, and the shrieking alarm twisting the air tight like a steel cable snapping under strain. The first to move were the black-suited security teams. They surged forward, swarming the podium. Senator Vaughn was pulled back abruptly, stumbling, nearly falling, forced behind the armored SUV. K-9 units were released instantly, charging to perimeter points like trained instincts in motion. But while the chaos converged toward the main gate, where the suspected shooter might be in a quiet corner under the shade of the old kennel wing, a different kind of movement stirred. Rook had already been standing. A sharp creak rang out as Rook struck the gate with one powerful paw. Once. Twice. The third hit burst the rusted hinge clean off. No commands, no keys. Rook broke out. Alone. And the moment light flooded the corridor, Rook shot forward, toward the heart of the ceremony. No hesitation, no glances, no waiting. Murphy gave chase. Too late. His shout was swallowed by the chaos of sirens and stampeding boots. Rook charged, a gray blur slicing through the frenzy past terrified onlookers, past the flags lining the aisles, past riot shields rising too slowly to matter. No one could stop him. No one dared. One young officer tried to step in but froze the instant Rook locked eyes with him. No growl, no threat, just a stare that said, clear as thunder, you don't understand. But I remember. Rook veered away from the exit, didn't chase the shots, didn't run to the perimeter. He headed straight for the center of the field, where Vaughn had been dragged moments earlier, now crouched behind a wall of protection. One leap, no run-up, no bark. Silence fell over the grounds. Only the wind, and the sound of Rook's paws hitting the dirt. That steel-gray body came to a halt right in front of Vaughn. No lunge, no sound. Just standing still, head low, eyes fixed on the tailored jacket now smeared with dust. A security agent reached for his weapon. Murphy appeared just in time. His voice didn't shout, but it was enough. Don't. Vaughn hadn't recovered. His eyes were wide, breath ragged, hands trembling against his chest. But Rook had caught it. A scent. Not of blood. Not of gunpowder. Something older. Something Kayla had once stopped for in the middle of a battlefield. The scent of a hidden camera. Rook stepped forward, lowered his head, nose to the left pocket of Vaughn's jacket. A sharp tear as Rook bit through the fabric. A small device no larger than a pen fell to the ground, its lens glinting like a needle under the sun. The clink it made was soft, like water dripping onto stone. But it was loud enough to ignite something no one could yet name. Rook looked up. And barked. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a threat. It was a signal, a warning, a reckoning. And every camera, whether broadcasting live or filming quietly in the background, caught the moment. The moment a discarded dog written off, locked away, forgotten, stepped into the spotlight of a carefully orchestrated ceremony. Not to play along, but to blow it wide open. In that suspended breath of the world, Rook didn't charge Vaughn like a wild animal. Rook didn't bite, didn't growl, didn't threaten. Rook did something no one expected. A sudden, precise movement, jaws locking onto the edge of Vaughn's pristine jacket, the same jacket that shimmered proudly under the morning sun just minutes before. A sickening rip tore the silence in two. Fabric shredded, the coat yanked away, revealing not just a man in panic, but a strange lining beneath, a double-stitched inner pocket reinforced against the chest, clearly meant to conceal something not meant to be seen. Something fell. Small, but heavy enough for the sound of metal hitting stone to crack the air like a hammer. Everyone looked down. There, in the center of the ceremony grounds, a black, cylindrical object, no bigger than a finger, blinking a single red light. A hidden camera. Murphy stepped forward, bent down, picked it up with steady hands. He turned it once, and with a few practiced taps, the embedded micro-lens flared to life. Footage appeared. No sound, but the image was piercingly clear. A room, familiar. A military map lit dimly from above, and a woman in olive fatigues standing beneath it, her eyes sharp, her finger pointing toward the western quadrant of El Paso. Kayla. Murphy said nothing. He didn't need to, because every soul standing there had seen this clip before, the same grainy, edited version that had been played in hearings, twisted into evidence, used to label Kayla a traitor. But this was different. A wider frame, no audio cuts, no blacked-out segments, and most importantly, no indication of Kayla ever leaking information. Instead, she was issuing a tactical report, clearly warning about civilian vulnerabilities, and finishing with, "I do not share coordinates without confirmation from command." Then, from off-screen, a voice replied, "I am command today." That voice was Vaughn's. The silence that followed was longer than a lifetime. A young reporter in the front row stepped backward, hand trembling as she lowered her headset. They had just confirmed. This footage had never been released. Not in any official archive. Not on any military database. And yet Rook had remembered. The scent of Vaughn's nicotine-stained fingers from that day. The faint residue of fabric spray hastily applied after the briefing. The smell of deception. Something only a dog whose known truth could ever recognize as false. Vaughn staggered. His hand swept across his chest as if to hide what had already fallen. But it was too late. The broadcast was still live, and Rook, after one final bark that echoed into the stillness, stepped back. Not to flee, but to clear the frame. A German shepherd, eyes bright, posture steady, standing among flags, folding chairs, and a crowd frozen in disbelief, as if saying, "Do you believe me now?" Murphy knelt beside Rook. "It's all right now, old friend." His voice shook but held, his hand resting gently on Rook's shoulder. And Rook didn't bark again, didn't lunge. He simply sat down, calm, composed, like a soldier who had finally completed the mission. From the day they tore him from Kayla to this moment, he had carried the truth, and now he has delivered it. No more words were needed. Because this time, silence was the loudest proof of all. Within seconds, the live stream from the memorial site exploded across the internet, spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. On screen, even as the camera trembled with a slow, stunned zoom, viewers could see it clearly. The tension on Vaughn's face, the fear in his eyes, as the hidden device slipped from the custom-tailored jacket he'd worn for this polished, official event. And then a hashtag appeared in the comment feed, then hundreds, then thousands. Justice for Kayla. It wasn't coordinated. It wasn't engineered by a social media strategist. It was raw instinct, from people who, for the first time, saw something that didn't need to be explained, didn't need narration, didn't need words. Only the eyes of a dog. On Twitter, a 12-second clip, Rook tearing the coat, the hidden camera hitting the floor, the lone bark echoing across the courtyard, was set to slow motion and cinematic music. But underneath, the captions told a different story. You can't train a dog to do that for fame. I don't know much about the military, but I trust Rook. That wasn't instinct. That was a memory. Major networks moved fast. CNN, Reuters, AP, they all reposted the footage from every possible angle. Alongside them came resurfaced files of Kayla Monroe, once a decorated officer, once a field leader in life-or-death missions, then gone, erased. All after one night, branded a traitor. That evening, Ayanna Delgado, former Pentagon war correspondent, was the first to speak up live on national broadcast. I've seen the original report. It didn't match what we were shown in court. And if a retired K-9 can still recognize the scent of the truth, then maybe it's time we ask, how many of us smelled the lies and said nothing? Her words were clipped and shared over a black and white still of Rook, sitting under the fading sun, head tilted slightly, as if waiting, as if asking a question that no human had yet found the courage to say aloud. By nightfall, a new hashtag emerged. Bring her home. There was no movement, no leader, no campaign team, just people once they saw the truth wanting to make things right. Veterans formed open forums. They reposted every deleted file from Kayla's case. Law students hosted teach-ins on federal trial rights. One high school in Arizona even launched a special course, What a Dog Can Teach Us About Loyalty. Murphy said nothing. He gave no interviews. He simply removed Rook's nameplate from the North Lake Kennel Gate and replaced it with an old tag, one Kayla had clipped to his collar during their first training mission in El Paso. 3 faded words, handwritten, trusted, still. And as outrage, grief, and awakening rippled across the country, a quiet update slipped beneath the radar. Kayla Monroe, once sentenced to indefinite solitary confinement in Hemlock, filed a 3rd appeal. But this time, she didn't use a lawyer. She didn't write a defense. She submitted a single URL, the video of Rook tearing Vaughn's coat time-stamped at second 11. No words, no argument. Just a moment seen through the eyes of a dog. And buried in the flood of comments and broadcasts, one private message landed in Ayanna Delgado's encrypted inbox. The first journalist to say Kayla's name on air, after 7 years of silence. The message held only one line. I was the one forced to edit that footage. I still have the backup drive, but I don't think I'm safe anymore. No sender info, no profile picture, new account, no signature. Ayanna read it, twice, 3 times, then replied with 3 words. Where, when, meet. 4 hours later, in a quiet coffee shop tucked in Old East Dallas, she sat across from a man in his 40s, heavy canvas jacket, hat pulled low. At his feet, a weathered tote bag he never let out of arm's reach. When he looked up, she knew those were the eyes of a man who had seen the truth, and stayed silent for too long. I'm Edwin Harrow, he said softly. Former senior tech, Tactical Data Security Unit. I know you can't verify that right away, but I brought this. He reached into the bag, pulled out a silver external drive, paint peeling at the edges. This is the cached file, from before they made me wipe the original. They forced me to splice fake audio, cut footage, erase the trace log from Kayla's locator tag. I never thought anyone would believe me. But then... His eyes drifted to her phone screen, paused on the frame of Rook barking, the lens of the spy cam glinting under the Texas sun. I saw that bark, and I knew I can't hide anymore." Ayanna didn't ask a thing. She didn't need to. Her fingers gently brushed the drive. Because evidence can be deleted. But memory and guilt will never go quietly. When the first article broke with the headline, "Former technician breaks silence, old hard drive may clear Kayla Monroe's name," it didn't just make waves. It lit the fuse of a movement that had no precedent, not in courtrooms, not from the military, but from those who had stayed silent for far too long. A group of tech students launched a website to analyze the raw data chain from the drive. Independent programmers ran encryption checks on the manipulated footage, frame by frame. And former K9 handlers began to reconnect, sharing stories of Rook's strange behavior over the past few years, as if that dog had always known the truth, and was simply waiting for someone to speak it aloud. On Reddit, a user named EchoHound posted, "If Rook is the only witness left, then we're living in a world where a dog understands betrayal better than humans ever did." That quote was printed and pinned to the gate of Mirror Haven, the K9 training camp where Murphy had first brought Rook when no one else wanted him. That evening, Edwin slipped out the back door of the cafe. He didn't look back, didn't leave a number, just left behind one thing. The same thing Kayla had once protected with everything she had. A fragment of truth. So small, the world had forgotten it existed. But thanks to Rook, it had returned. And this time, no one could look away. 3 days after the article went live, the names of 2 federal agents tied directly to Kayla's case began appearing in internal forums, darknet threads, and private groups, where veterans spoke truths that hadn't yet reached the light. One was Harrington, a former technical assistant from the Federal Rapid Response Team. He vanished from his residence the night before a subpoena was officially issued. The other, Vaughn C. Wright, the very same man who had once stood beside Kayla as her deputy commander, was caught preparing to flee the country under a false identity. At Houston International Airport, Wright entered the VIP lounge through a private passage. He didn't look at anyone, didn't turn around. One hand stayed buried in his jacket pocket, as if clinging to something no one could take away. But the door didn't open. A cold voice rang out. "Mr. Wright, the extradition order is now in effect. Please come with us." 2 Interpol officers, working with the Federal Security Task Force, stepped forward. In their hands, an official warrant, sealed and stamped, along with photographic evidence cross-referenced with the video recovered from Edwin Harrow's hard drive. Wright didn't flinch. He simply smirked. All this because of a dog? No one answered him, because by now the truth didn't belong to anyone. It stood on its own. And this time it stood on 4 legs. Back at Northlake, Murphy sat by the fence, his hand resting softly on Rook's head. National TV was replaying the arrest footage. Rook didn't look away from the screen. Ears up. Silent. Still. Murphy gave a slow nod. "They believe you now, old friend." He stood, moved to the wooden cabinet beside the kennel, and pulled out a worn file folder, its corners yellowed with age. Stamped on the front, K9 Behavioral Review. Murphy flipped to Rook's page. Under the sent response section, a note in faded blue ink, written in his own slanted handwriting. September 2020. Strong reactive behavior when exposed to scent from Senator Vaughn's jacket. No command, no training. Instinctive response. He hadn't filed that note in the official report. No one would have believed it. Everyone thought Rook was no longer fit for duty. But now, as data poured into daylight, as phones rang off the hook, as crowds began forming outside the White House with handmade signs, and justice for Kayla painted in bold strokes, Murphy knew The part that moved him most wasn't justice. It was Rook's eyes. Eyes that had never changed. Not since the day Kayla was taken away. They'd always stayed the same, steady, silent, waiting. In a world terrified of truth, Rook was never afraid. Rook's only fear was that no one would ever open the door to let the truth in. But now the door had opened. The legal office of the Justice Interpretation Initiative in D.C. received over 1,000 emails in just 3 hours. Every subject line was the same. Reopen Kayla's case. But they weren't from family, not from lawyers, not even from activist groups. They were from people who had never met her doctors, firefighters, law students, veterans, and those who had once served alongside dogs like Rook. A 3-minute clip, captured at the Northlake Memorial, had become an unofficial legal exhibit. In it, Rook, once declared unfit for service, didn't attack, didn't act on impulse. Rook simply stood up, locked eyes with one man, and silently tore open a suit jacket. Inside was a recording device. Its serial number matched perfectly to a redacted report from years ago. On June 17th, a federal court released an official statement. All original files in Kayla Monroe's case would be temporarily recalled. Unverified evidence sealed. All previous rulings suspended pending independent investigation. On national television, a spokesperson for the Veterans Alliance announced, "Justice once slept inside a falsified report, but today, a dog woke it up. What was meant as symbolic became literal." The quote was plastered across magazine covers for a week. And in a small office in South Texas, at a foundation for former federal operatives, a middle-aged man folded the article with care, setting down his coffee cup with a quiet tap. He opened a drawer, pulled out an old folder, its corners stained and edges curled. A faded sticky note still clung to the side. "Kayla, I'm sorry." He placed the folder inside an envelope, sealed it shut, and signed in red ink. "To Federal Court. Reopen Monroe file." At Hemlock, Kayla had no idea. She was still counting guard steps through the night, still scribbling daily notes on addressless paper, still holding on to half of a photo. The other half showed Rook. But something changed that day. A guard called her name. Not her prisoner number, her full name. Kayla Monroe. Legal counsel has filed a petition to reopen your case. She didn't rise immediately, just closed her eyes, and gently returned the torn photo to the metal desk drawer. Her lips moved. "Rook, I knew you would." And outside, the world began to shift. News spread like sparks through a dry forest. From local broadcasts to national morning shows, primetime talk panels to investigative specials. Kayla Monroe became the week's most urgent name, not because she was a former operative, but because the one who reignited justice was a dog. An old training clip from 2012 was restored from archived footage. In it, Rook, only 2 years old, was tasked with identifying a hidden microcamera sewn into a mock soldier's uniform. Not only did Rook detect the exact location, he alerted not by barking but with a look. That same look had reappeared at the memorial in Northlake. On the legal analysis program Justice Mirror, the two clips were played side by side, 2012 and now. Analysis grids lit up. Eye focus, tail stillness, nose angle, ear direction, a match rate of 92.3%. A behavioral psychologist specializing in working dogs spoke live. Rook didn't act from instinct. He acted from memory, from training, from a command that was never spoken but never forgotten. At Hemlock's front gates, crowds began gathering. No loudspeakers, no colorful banners, just hand-lettered signs on white boards. "We believe in Rook." A young woman stood at the front, holding the leash of a golden retriever. On the dog's collar was a metal tag, etched with the name Milo Therapy Dog. She said nothing, just gently stroked her dog's back the way someone, long ago, had done for Rook. One night the wind howled. Someone set up a projector outside the gate, replaying the old training video on loop, all through the dark. The light from the screen danced against Hemlock's stone walls. Not to protest, but to remind. Some truths don't need to be shouted, they only need to be seen. Inside cell 17, Kyla sat near the shuttered window. She couldn't see out, but deep down, she knew that light was real, like sunlight slipping through a locked keyhole. And that same night, in a federal conference room 200 miles away, the Office of Justice Oversight issued a high-priority memo. The Monroe case is now under full review, not because of public pressure, but because something never wavered the instinct to protect the truth. The memo was stamped and sent to all relevant departments, but at the bottom, in faint handwriting, source unknown, a line was added. Because some barks aren't cries for attention. They're how you say, I remember. That night there were no sirens, no rushed footsteps. Everything moved as if nothing had changed, but everything had. A document was placed on the desk of Hemlock's warden, the same place Kayla Monroe had spent 7 years. Without a calendar, without seasons, without a sound from the world outside. The warden read the line, then slowly folded the paper. Warm yellow lamplight spilled across shelves stacked with files. But among them, one folder remained open. Monroe, Kayla, former Special Operations Unit. The warden didn't request a press conference, didn't plan a public exoneration. He simply turned to the guard standing outside his glass door. Tell the driver to get the car. No markings, no lights. Use the north gate. What about the media, sir? Don't tell the media. She doesn't need a headline. She deserves to walk out on her own. The guard nodded. No questions asked. The steel door at hallway D creaked open at exactly 4:17 a.m. In the darkness, the sound of the key turning in the lock echoed slowly, each click deliberate, as if even the prison itself was trying to listen. Could freedom really be returning? Kayla sat still. She didn't leap to her feet when the door swung open. She simply looked at the guard, then down at her hands. Hands that had once gripped a rifle, written field reports, rested gently on Rook's back every morning before deployment. Now, they trembled, just slightly. There was no one waiting at the end of the hallway. No escort. Every door along the path stood open as if the road had been drawn long ago, just waiting for the right soul to walk it. The north gate of Hemlock sat tucked behind a grove of aging pines. The wind whispered through the brittle branches, dry leaves rustling like secrets finally being spoken aloud. A silver-gray SUV waited with its back door open. Kyla approached but didn't step in right away. She turned, looked back at the stone wall, the one she'd stared at for 7 years, listening each night as the wind scraped against the bars, reminding her that somewhere beyond, light still existed. No one waved, no one called out. But in her heart, she knew someone was still waiting. And at that very moment, almost 300 miles away, in a weathered wooden cabin on the edge of North Lake, Rook opened his eyes. Not because of a sound, but because something had shifted in the air. A space had just been filled. Murphy sat by the fireplace, reading. He looked up and saw Rook quietly rise, step away from the rug. No panic, no confusion, just steady, grounded footsteps like the dog already knew exactly where he needed to go. Murphy didn't call out. He didn't ask. He simply stood, opened the door, and whispered like a father letting go of a grown child. "Go on, Rook. She's waiting." And Rook, walked off the wooden porch, didn't look back. Through the wind of that early morning, there came a silent echo. A reunion was beginning. No one knew it yet, but it had already begun. There were no protesters at Hemlock that morning, no news vans, no reporters. The sun hadn't yet risen past the horizon, but the thin mist had already started to lift, dissolving quietly, as if even the air was making way for something sacred. From beyond the outer gate, someone was walking towards the prison. A figure in a worn, earth-colored coat, no hat, no sunglasses, only eyes, deep, still, and silent like the bottom of a winter lake. Kayla stopped at the iron gate. Over her shoulder hung a small bag with fraying straps. Her shoes were faded, weathered, the same pair she'd worn the day she was taken. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. Because right then the gate unlatched from the inside. As if the world, after too many years of silence, had finally whispered, "You've been forgotten long enough." She stepped forward. Every footfall pressed into the cold dirt like passing over old memories, nights without stars, walls without names, dreams that always ended in the breath of a creature who never stopped waiting. And then Kayla froze. Just beyond the gate, in the clearing blanketed with dew and mist, sat a quiet shape, low to the ground, still. A gray silhouette in the morning fog. Rook. No whistle, no command, no leash. Just one look, a thread stretched between two souls, each returning from opposite ends of forgetting. Kayla didn't run. She walked, slowly. Rook didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply rose to his feet, and when the space between them narrowed to a few steady breaths, Rook lifted one paw and placed it gently in her hand. It wasn't firm. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough to stop the wind, enough to make time pause, enough to sting the eyes of the guard behind the gate, though no one said why. Kayla dropped to her knees. She didn't speak, just wrapped her arms around him. No squeeze, no shiver. Like she was holding herself the version of her that never stopped believing. If one dog remembers me, then maybe the world hasn't turned all the way away. Rook pressed his head into her shoulder. No crying, no licking her face, just sitting there, with her, side by side. One who had been locked away, one who had been cast aside, now side by side in the frozen morning light. No one interrupted, no one dared. Because some reunions don't need justice, only a touch. A freelance photographer, the only other person at Hemlock's gate that morning, had stopped by, intending to snap a few shots for a write-up on federal prison conditions. He'd never heard of Kayla Monroe, didn't know the name Rook, but he raised his camera and captured it. A moment unposed, unframed, unstaged. Just Kayla, forehead resting against Rook's, her fingers trembling not from cold, but because after 7 years, she had finally touched the one thing that had kept her alive, waiting without reason. No medals in the photo, no uniforms, no speeches, no fists raised, no flags flown. Just two figures, one kneeling, one standing tall, a warrior once silenced, a soul that never needed words. The photo went up on the photographer's personal blog. No hashtags, no headlines, only 6 quiet words beneath it. When faith refuses to die. 36 hours later, the image hit front pages across the country. 72 hours later, it was everywhere from single mothers in Arkansas to veterans in Utah to high schoolers in the Bronx. People sent it to each other without needing to explain. It had moved beyond politics. It was no longer just about Kayla Monroe, or even just a dog named Rook. It had become something deeper, a stubborn ache for something fading from society. Faith. Between humans. And what's good? The image never spoke, but in its silence were hundreds of thousands of comments, millions of shares, captions that simply read, "I cried? We need more rooks. Thank you for not giving up." And from newsroom desks to law offices to K-9 units across the country, people began calling her something else. No longer traitor. No longer prisoner 711K. They didn't call her traitor anymore. They didn't even call her hero. They called her the one who came back. That day, Kayla sat in the small back room of the old wooden house, the one where she and Rook had been temporarily placed. Soft morning light spilled in through the window, landing gently on her hand as it rested on Rook's head. The rhythm steady. Neither of them said a word. They never really needed to. On the wall behind them, the photo from the Hemlock Gate had been printed, laminated, and taped up. But it wasn't the photo that made Kyla pause. It was the sound of a phone ringing. The cell phone on the table lit up. Unknown number. Kayla hesitated. She almost didn't answer. But then Rook looked up and gave the smallest nod. She picked up. On the other end was the voice of a young boy. Trembling. Software but clear. "Is this Miss Monroe?" "This is she." "My name is Eli, I'm 12. My dad was a police officer, but he got shot last year, while he was on duty." Kayla sat upright. The air shifted, her hand tensed slightly on Rook's head. "I'm sorry for calling. I needed to say something." She didn't interrupt. She just listened. Eli took a deep breath. "I used to hate dogs. After my dad died, I stopped trusting them. I thought, if dogs were really loyal, then maybe his K-9 should have saved him." Kyla clenched her fingers around Rook's fur, still silent. "But that photo, the one of you and Rook, it made me think again." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't know why, but suddenly I wanted to believe again, that some dogs still remember, still wait, and that maybe justice can come from something as small as a paw touching a hand." There was a pause. Just breathe, and the faint sound of sniffles. Kayla pressed her hand to her mouth. Rook leaned into her leg. Then Eli said one last thing, his voice a little lighter now. "I'm sorry I stopped believing, and thank you for not..." The line clicked. The call ended. Kayla had said nothing the entire time. But her eyes shimmered, and Rook gently licked the back of her hand. There was no speech that day, no formal announcement of reinstatement, no televised redemption arc. Just the voice of a child saying what an entire system had forgotten. Trust doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be held on to long enough for someone else to find it again. The day Kayla was invited back to the Rapid Response Unit in Dallas, she showed up. She sat in the exact same chair as before, inside that meeting room. Her fingers ran over a tiny scratch on the tabletop, the one where she had once rested her very first training journal. They handed her the reinstatement papers, bold black ink, official seals, signed by all the right names. They said all the right things. They looked at her with gratitude, the kind of gaze they should have given her a long time ago. She listened, then gently shook her head. "Thank you, but I already have a place to go back to." The air in the room dropped. No one objected. No one tried to persuade her, because in her eyes at that moment was something they all understood, but none could touch. Freedom. 1 month later, a small center opened near Lake Whitney. It wasn't a training facility. There were no iron gates, no alarms, just a quiet stretch of land with open wooden kennels, low trees casting cool shade, and a simple sign on weathered gray wood that read, "Where warriors are called by their true names." Kyla didn't promote it. There were no interviews, no magazine features. But the ones who came, they understood. These were the dogs labeled unfit for duty, flagged as aggressive, resistant, or worse. Left behind. One by one they arrived. No commands, no forced obedience, just a place to lie down, and someone willing to see them the way Kayla once saw Rook, buried deep in a forgotten stack of files. Rook wasn't a symbol. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a companion, the very first teacher. Each morning, Rook would make his rounds. No barking, no judgment. He simply paused in front of each new dog, lowering his head just a bit, as if to say, "I was there too." And somehow, the dogs understood. Some late afternoons, when the sun kissed the edge of the hills and fallen leaves scattered across the dirt paths, Kyla sat quietly on the wooden steps. Watching Rook play with a three-legged puppy, not to teach it how to fight, but to remind it that it still mattered. She never returned to the unit. Because sometimes, what needs protecting isn't behind a front line. It's in the places no one thinks to look. Mirror Haven began receiving more of the so-called non-compliant, difficult, or expired service dogs. No attached paperwork, no clear reasons, just eyes full of confusion, curved spines, and labored breaths, as if every inhale was its own kind of resistance. Some refused to eat. Some lay still in the corners of their kennels for 3 days without moving. Some howled softly at night, long and low, carrying the ghosts of old battlefields in every echo. Kayla didn't train them. She was simply present. And Rook somehow did what no one expected. He brought them back from the shadows. No orders, no drills, just a steady gaze, soft steps around the kennels, and those gentle touches with his nose, as if telling each forgotten comrade a tiny story. I was abandoned too, but I made it back. One winter night, the fog was thick, and Rook refused to return to his kennel. Kayla called out, but he only looked at her, then turned his head toward the fence, where a deaf, elderly K9 had arrived that morning. Kayla waited a long time, until she saw Rook lie down beside him. No touching, no gestures, just being there. By sunrise, the old dog lifted his head for the first time. At Mirror Haven, no one counted how many dogs were rehabilitated. No one tracked how long each one took to step out of their old wounds. Only one thing remained consistent every day. In the morning, Rook would do his rounds and sit quietly in front of one kennel. His eyes are never harsh, only patient, because Rook understood. Sometimes all it takes is one creature refusing to give up on you, to make you choose to live again. That day, the sky was gray. No rain, no sun, just a cold light draped across the steps of Mirror Haven, as if the world was holding its breath, making room for something new that was just about to arrive. Kayla was in the back room, quietly sorting through the medical records of the newly arrived dogs, when a shadow appeared on the path outside. No one had called ahead. No appointment was listed. But Kayla knew, from the way the door didn't slam, from the footsteps trying not to rush, from the breath caught halfway in her throat. He stopped at the bottom of the wooden steps. Kayla stepped outside. Said nothing. She recognized him, the man who once sat in the hearing room years ago, who didn't meet her eyes, who said nothing in her defense, but didn't turn away either when the accusations were read aloud under the cold white light of the overhead fixtures. He wasn't the one who condemned her. He was the one who chose silence. Between them lay a small courtyard, scattered with fallen leaves. Rook emerged from the kennel behind her, standing beside Kayla. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood still, watching the man who now looked down with trembling shoulders and eyes rimmed red. He didn't bring a gift. No letter of apology, no elaborate explanation. Just one sentence, soft as a breeze slipping through winter air. I knew. It was wrong that day. Kayla didn't nod, didn't turn away. She simply stood, like a wall that had once been knocked down, now learning to stand again, not to keep anyone out, but to witness. Rook stepped forward, pressed his nose gently against the back of the man's hand, still bearing the old calluses of years gone by. Then turned away. No hesitation, no resentment. Because some wounds don't need punishment, they just need to be acknowledged. On his way back, the man stopped at a gas station. He sat in his car for nearly 15 minutes without starting the engine, staring at his own palms, and for the first time in years, he wept, not out of guilt, but because someone, without saying a word, had forgiven him. Back at Mirror Haven, Rook resumed his morning rounds. No one asked, no one brought it up, but from that day forward, every new dog that arrived was greeted the same way, with a soft brush of Rook's paw, a quiet signal that said, "You're not alone." That afternoon, the sun slanted low behind the pine trees at the edge of the sanctuary, casting long shadows of two quiet souls onto the dry, golden earth. Kyla sat against a boulder, gently twirling an old rope in her fingers, the very rope they once used to tie Rook's muzzle back during those first training days. Rook lay beside her, his head resting on her leg, breath steady, eyes half closed, as if listening to a story he already knew, but still wanted to hear again, just in her voice. Kayla began speaking, not loudly, not softly, just like a breeze skimming the still surface of a lake. Back then, our unit had 7 people. Now there are only 2 names left that haven't been marked as MIA, KIA, or never spoken of again. She paused, her eyes drifting toward a sky slowly fading to ash. They laughed when you picked up a strange radio signal at the border post. Said I was paranoid. Obsessed. Rook didn't move, but his tail gave the slightest twitch, just once, like he was answering something only the 2 of them could understand. Some died because a road wasn't cleared for mines. Some never came back from a raid deep inside the red zone. But the worst kind of death. She lowered her gaze to the scar on her wrist, left from the night they dragged her from base in silence, is when your truth has no one left to hear it. Kyla ran her hand down Rook's back, where his once dark coat now held strands of silver. It's not anger I feel. Not anymore. She exhaled slowly. I just wish they'd been patient enough to hear your first bark. That bark wasn't an alarm. It was a reminder. Something was wrong. Still, Rook made no sound. But this time he rose, gently pressing his head to Kayla's chest. A gesture not often made, but full of meaning. Kayla closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't speak again. She simply tightened her grip on the frayed rope, the last thing she had from a time when they were still trusted. The one thing that had never lied to her. And beside her, Rook, once discarded, once labeled unfit for combat, stayed right where he was, not to guard, not to watch, but to remind her that even if no one says their names anymore, the old battlefields still echo. Only, not many stay still long enough to listen. The season's first winds arrived, carrying the scent of damp soil and rustling dry leaves behind the old kennel path. Kayla sat alone on the wooden steps, a mug of ginger tea steaming in her hands. She did this every night. But tonight, the silence was heavier. Out in the yard, Rook didn't move. He sat facing the far gate, body still as stone. His back looked thinner. His shoulders sloped like a worn rucksack that had traveled too far. His left leg, the one that once vaulted over steel fences, once pounded through mortar-streaked terrain, now trembled slightly. Kayla didn't call him. Because she knew when Rook chose that spot near the gate, facing it directly, it meant he was waiting, not for someone, but for something only he could sense. She set her mug down, pulled on a thick coat, and walked out to join the faded gray shadow sitting still beneath the soft drizzle. Rook didn't turn, just flicked one ear back, as if to say, "I know you're here." Kayla sat down beside him without a word. Her gaze followed Rook's, toward the front gate, where only a flickering light remained, swinging gently with the creak of old metal in the wind. "Does it hurt?" she asked, voice light as mist breaking on grass. Rook didn't answer, but his tail, still bearing an old scar, swept across the earth once, drawing a gentle arc in the wet dirt. The vet had said it a few weeks ago. Rook's heart was weakening. Slow. Uneven. The meds could buy time, but not forever. Kayla knew. Rook knew, too. And still, every night, instead of curling up inside, wrapped in blankets, Rook came to this very place, at the same hour, facing the same direction, as if, so long as he sat there, something remained unfinished, and that something was enough reason to keep going. No more battlefields, no more orders, just friendship, unshaken. The cold wind picked up. Kayla reached out, resting her hand lightly on Rook's head. His fur, once dark and sleek, had turned soft and pale with time, but his eyes, those same eyes that had once held steady through interrogations, that had barked once when the whole world stayed silent, never changed. Kayla smiled, not with sadness, not with grief, but with peace, because no matter how many years passed, Rook had never forgotten the habit of waiting, in the very place where he once saw the one he trusted most come home. The early wind threaded through the leaves, brushing gently across the soft grass on the hillside. A few white petals drifted down like sentences left unfinished from a conversation that had long passed into memory. Kayla still came here every final Sunday of the month, not to mourn, but to accompany. In that open space, once a training yard echoing with barks each time she walked past, there was now only the wind and the shadows of memories that had never faded. That morning, beside the small wooden plaque, there was a new bouquet. Nothing fancy, just a bunch of white dahlias, bound with a faded green twine. Kayla knelt, slipping a small card from the stems. The handwriting was neat, careful, no signature. "I made the team. I wear the R-17 badge now, just like I promised. I still remember those eyes. I still believe one dog can change someone's whole life, just by choosing not to leave." Kayla looked up. In the soft morning light, the ink on the card seemed to touch a memory only she could see, but it felt as vivid as yesterday. The boy who once called Mirror Haven with a shaky voice on a public phone was now a man in uniform, and he had kept his word. No need to come in person, no ceremony, just once a year. On that day, a bouquet, a card, and a quiet reminder. Rook hadn't disappeared. He'd become a part of what good still moves forward. Kayla sat down, her back against the wooden wall, the card still resting in her palm. Her eyes drifted toward the gate at the crest of the hill, the spot where Rook used to wait every evening. The place that once stood between loss and hope. And when the wind passed again, she could almost hear Rook's footsteps, steady, grounded, the sound that once helped her rise, no matter how far she had fallen. Down below, A group stood in formation. Gray uniforms, each one paired with a dog, some tall, some lean, different coats and eye colors, but all focused upward, watching her. Not because of rank, not because of fame, but because of a story they'd been told the day they arrived at Mirror Haven. Kayla walked down toward them, slow but sure. Her gaze passed over every set of canine eyes until she stopped, before a young woman standing beside a deep brown-eyed shepherd. "What's your name?" Kayla asked softly. "Lauren, ma'am," the woman replied, her hand resting gently on the dog's head. "And this one?" "Norik. He was cut from the state K9 program. Wouldn't respond to whistle cues. But I believe Norik just needs someone who understands him." Kayla nodded. She crouched down, offering a hand without touching. Just a familiar gesture. Norik leaned in, sniffed briefly, then sat. Not out of submission, but like a whisper. "I'm ready." No one clapped, no one cheered, because truth doesn't need applause. Kayla stood again, her eyes carrying both memory and trust. You all know Rook's story, but what matters isn't what Rook did. That's why he did it. The wind stirred once more. A soft green now covered the earth where dust used to settle. "Here, no one's here to train dogs to obey. You're here to learn how to listen." A few puzzled glances, but then nods began to ripple outward. Slow. Genuine. Kayla passed through the line of trainees until she stopped at the last row. There stood a boy, maybe 15, smaller than the rest, holding the leash of a pitch-black dog with one ear missing. He looked at her, said nothing. She smiled. "You know, Rook was like that too. Didn't say much, but always showed up when it mattered." Kayla didn't talk about the trial, didn't mention the pardon, didn't recount the sleepless nights or the days when memory was the only reason to keep breathing. She only said one thing, and she said it very quietly. When the world turns its back on you, look toward the one place that never closed, where a dog, I'm still waiting. And somewhere, in the silence of the hilltop, in the rustle of the trees, beneath the fading afternoon sun, there was a space, not empty, but sacred, because Rook's memory had never left. It remained in every scratch on the old wood porch, in every echo of a bark from years past, in the way the newest dogs still paused at the fence, as if waiting for someone to return. Kayla placed the old notebook into a drawer. The final page was filled. No conclusion, no final period. Just one line, slightly smudged. "Some warriors don't need medals. They just need one person to believe." They never gave up. Outside, the trainees were walking their dogs through the quiet yard. No shouted commands, no whistles, just eyes meeting eyes, deep enough to understand, still enough to trust. One scruffy little pup, dark-coated, short-tailed, wide brown eyes, paused at the steps. He sniffed around a sunken patch of grass, then looked up. No bark, no wag, just stillness. Kayla stepped out, sitting beside him quietly. She didn't reach out. She just sat, the same way she used to sit beside Rook. "You hear it too, don't you?" The pup didn't move, just slowly stepped closer, settling beside her, resting his head on her knee. Exactly like Rook once did. No applause, no soundtrack, no cameras, just a touch. As if Rook, from somewhere beyond, had crossed one more invisible border just to finish the last chapter, without needing a single word. And for those who once listened, who once waited patiently, who chose to believe instead of doubt, that moment was enough. Some stories don't need to end with victory or revenge. Sometimes all it takes is a long enough gaze, a bark at the right time, or a simple touch to change the way the world sees a creature once deemed useless. Rook couldn't speak. But Rook told the truth anyway, not through a statement, not with a file, but with loyalty that asked for nothing in return. The kind you don't teach, the kind you can't buy. Kayla never asked for her rank back. Instead, she built a place where the discarded, the forgotten, the misunderstood could be loved again, not because they were flawless, but because they still knew how to love. German Shepherds aren't just an exceptional breed. They are silent warriors who may bleed, may be cast aside, but have never once betrayed. And if you're reading this now, please believe, somewhere out there, in an old shelter on a quiet porch, beneath a tree you used to pass every day, a dog might still be waiting for you to come home. Not out of duty, but out of love.